All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to our latest explainer where we take complex, high-stakes information and break it down so you can clearly see the underlying mechanics. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating expert analysis on what we're calling the non-resident risk calculus. And here's the core thesis we'll be exploring. Standard financial and career milestones completely fail non-resident professionals. Why? Well, because traditional advice entirely ignores the legal fragility and the ticking clock of temporary immigration status. We're going to strip away the generic, cookie-cutter advice and look at the actual cause and effect relationships governing wealth and career stability. So here's our roadmap for today. First, asset vulnerability. Second, human capital risk. Third, regulatory exposure. And finally, strategic resilience. Let's jump in. Section 1, asset vulnerability, or really, the true cost of housing debt. The implicit assumption most people make is that, hey, if a bank approves your mortgage, you can afford the home, right? But there's one single number you absolutely have to pay attention to: 60. That is the 60-day grace period a non-resident typically has to find a new job or leave the country following a layoff. Think of it like a ticking stopwatch that starts the exact second you lose your income. You see, if you're a standard citizen, a layoff is a financial problem. But for a non-resident, it's an immediate geographic and legal crisis. I mean, 60 days is barely enough time to pack up your life, let alone sell a house. Because of that 60-day cliff, we really have to contrast the standard advice with the defensive framework. Standard financial advisors will tell you to allocate about 30% of your income to housing, but expert analysis suggests a much more defensive, risk-adjusted rule of 20 to 25%. When you lack a permanent safety net, pushing your budget to that 30% mark leaves you absolutely no room to breathe. You've got to factor in property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, not just the base mortgage. Keeping your total costs to 20 or 25% creates the breathing room you actually need to navigate a sudden visa crisis without defaulting. And this brilliantly illustrates the hidden mechanisms that trap early buyers. Buying a home is essentially a 6 to 10-year geographic commitment. If you lose your job and your visa status forces you to leave the country, you are forced into a rushed sale. And selling a house typically consumes 7 to 11% of the sale price right off the top in closing costs and realtor fees. So if you're forced to sell within a 5-year window, any equity you've managed to build is almost entirely wiped out by transaction fees and market fluctuations. You don't just lose your home, you actively destroy your wealth. Meanwhile, keeping your cash in high-yield savings offers a highly liquid alternative that won't punish you for a sudden relocation. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. For non-resident Indians, the real question shouldn't be, will the bank give me a loan? But rather, can I really afford this house without putting my job, my visa, and the next 5 to 10 years of my life at risk? This fundamentally shifts the entire focus from your maximum mortgage approval to your absolute survival runway. To put a hard number on it, if your total housing costs are $2,500 a month, you need roughly $30,000 in liquid savings just to cover that 1-year runway. Expert reports frame this not as a nice-to-have, but as a non-negotiable prerequisite before signing a mortgage. It prevents desperation. Because, let's face it, when you're under extreme pressure, you make poor long-term decisions. Having this liquidity gives you the power to make smart, calculated choices. Moving on to Section 2, human capital risk, and what we're calling the entry-level education trap. We are seeing a massive implicit assumption flaw right now in international education. Students are out there choosing master's degrees based on data from 5 years ago. But the reality? Demand is no longer evenly distributed. Artificial intelligence integration is actively erasing the basic entry-level layer of technical roles. If your degree only prepares you to do basic coding, standard data pulling, or entry-level design, you're entering an incredibly saturated and highly vulnerable market. If we map this out, on one side, we have highly saturated AI vulnerable fields. We're talking basic data analytics, entry-level UX design, entry-level product management. These are areas where tools can now do the heavy lifting, meaning the competition for entry-level human roles is fierce. On the flip side, we see the infrastructure and high-growth fields, data engineering, cloud systems, AI cybersecurity. These are complex foundational roles. AI doesn't just magically run on a laptop, it runs on massive cloud architectures that require advanced systemic human knowledge to build and secure. This builds a very clear hierarchy of professional value. Layer 1 is just having basic skills and a degree. Like we said, highly saturated. Layer 2 is understanding systems and how your specific work ties to business revenue. Now that makes you stand out. But Layer 3, that is where you've solved real-world problems and created measurable impact. Non-resident professionals absolutely must target Layer 3 to survive. The market just no longer rewards average talent, and resting at Layer 1 is a direct path to an expired visa and a wasted tuition fee. All right, part 3, regulatory exposure. Let's navigate some of these hidden vulnerabilities. Even with perfect finances and elite skills, sudden shifts in immigration enforcement can trigger a lot of panic. You've probably seen those sensationalized headlines about massive crackdowns. For instance, 10,000 international students targeted in fraud investigations regarding shell companies and third-party work sites. It sounds terrifying, right? But context is literally everything. 10,000 students represents less than a third of 1% of the total student visa population. Statistically, the overwhelming majority, 99.7%, are entirely unaffected by this specific enforcement action. So the headline is actually a distraction. Expert analysis points out a crucial, non-obvious detail here. Highly publicized enforcement announcements are frequently used to lay the groundwork and justify severe, overarching regulatory restrictions that end up affecting everyone. The real danger isn't the targeted investigation itself. It's the underlying policy shifts that those investigations are used to push through. Here is a prime example of cause and effect in regulatory policy. Currently, student visas are generally valid for the duration of academic status. But if a proposed hard 4-year limit is implemented, it creates a massive structural threat. Because to extend your stay, you have to file extension forms. And the critical vulnerability here is that government processing is notoriously delayed. If your status expires while you're just sitting there waiting for a backlogged government agency to process your perfectly legal paperwork, you instantly begin accruing unlawful presence. A simple administrative delay is suddenly weaponized against you. It literally becomes a deportable offense. Which brings us to our final section, part 4, strategic resilience. Let's talk about building a defensive framework. So, how do you actually survive this landscape? By shifting away from reactive panic and moving toward rigorous management. First, maintain that 1-year liquid runway. Cash is flexibility. Plain and simple. Second, heavily vet your employers. Ghost offices and unverified third-party placements are massive regulatory targets right now. Third, rent instead of buying if you cannot guarantee your geographic stability for the next 6 to 10 years. Flexibility is worth way more than a forced sale housing asset. And finally, stop relying entirely on randomized immigration lotteries. What you really want to do is pivot to talent-based pathways. This is the optimal regulatory escape hatch. We're talking about specialized immigration categories governed by your verifiable expertise, not a random draw. Historically, these pathways can see approval rates in the mid-90 percentiles because you actually maintain control over the criteria rather than leaving your life up to a literal lottery. Experts strongly advise highly skilled individuals to have their professional portfolios formally evaluated for merit-based security. Which brings us to our final takeaway. I want you to genuinely ask yourself, are you building your future on a foundation of standard assumptions or a risk-adjusted reality? You simply cannot play a high-stakes game using rules meant for people who already have a permanent safety net. Understand the hidden mechanisms, build your liquid runway, and target that top layer of human capital. Let the insights from this explainer guide your next strategic move Stay resilient out there.